Hello, hello. So sorry for a little bit of a late start. Had a kind of a long delay when I was getting ready here. Um, I had a little bit of a late night after work because little Cassidy needed to cuddle, and who was I to deny him such a... We did learn two words on Eastward, actually. We learned two words, and they're in the new words list. So if you want to try out new word... Oh, I forgot to put new word in my title, but if you want to try out the new word command, exclamation mark, new word, there's new words in there, so check it out. Yeah, fancy setup. Little Miss Cakes said that my bright yellow screen was not conducive to a comfortable reading atmosphere, so we're trying out. This is the old reading layout. This is what I used to use from my old stream scene collection. I don't use this one anymore. I don't use any of these anymore, but I figure if the yellow is grating on people who are trying to relax and have a nice time, then who am I to grate upon you? Oh, I didn't know if you were AFK for that. I didn't know if you heard all that. So yeah, we'll try out the darker screen, see if this vibes with everybody a little bit more. Fan of the black and gold. This is up my alley. Yeah, all of my old stuff was black and gold. I'm a big fan of yellow and black, which is why I love those Soul Dynasty skins. But I'm a big fan of the bright yellow, personally. But not if we're trying to be comfy. Not if we're trying to be comfy and you guys aren't comfy, then we'll make it a little comfier. We'll make it a little comfier and cozier. Right? Did you guys bring in some tea or some honk chocolate for the reading tonight? I hope y'all are getting nice and cozy. I got some... I don't have a London Fog today, but I do... You know what? I talk about London Fogs a lot lately. It makes it sound like I drink them all the time. I usually don't. I usually have, like, a couple London Fogs a year, but I've been drinking a lot of them only recently. I've been waiting to play Overwatch, but now I'm sweaty and exercise. Ooh, I envy you. I didn't exercise today, and I really wanted to, but I couldn't get out of bed because Cassidy needed to snuggle with me, so I worked all day. I sat in this very chair right here. I made dinner. I cuddled with my cat, and now I'm here, so... I'm not sweaty or exercised, but I'm glad that you are. Can you go exercise again so you can exercise for me? I don't think I'm gonna have time to tonight. Maybe after stream. Maybe after stream. But I have a chai latte tonight. Chai latte. We're really switching it up. We got chai in this cup. I'm not done, so I'll do some for you. Oh, thank you, Don. That's so sweet of you. I really appreciate that because I've been sitting here for way too long. I need some help. We'll probably do maybe like an hour and a half or so. Maybe leave me some time to exercise after I get off stream here before I have to go to bed again. I can't wait until my schedule changes in just a couple weeks here. I think actually, what, 2 weeks from now? It's changing on the 10th. Yeah, so 2 weeks from today, my work schedule's changing and I'm gonna start work 2 hours later. I'm gonna work 2 hours later at night as well, but I'll go in later so I can stay up late and I don't have to worry about getting up in the morning, and it's gonna be great. I'm really excited. I think I'm gonna be a lot happier doing it that way. The dark background is letting me see your real hair color. Does the yellow background change my hair color? Who was I? Was I a platinum blonde? You know, when I was a small tyke, I was a platinum blonde. I think that happens a lot. A lot of people have like really light blonde hair when they're young. But I had like platinum blonde hair till I was like 12. And then it turned darker. Yeah. Is the music to voice ratio okay for you guys? This is on, like I said, my old scene, so I checked it, but just want to make sure it's okay, because it's not the setup I usually use. This is the antique hate beat, the vintage hate beat. The yellow muted all the blonde in your hair, made it look dark brown. Oh, yeah, I have dark blonde hair, shockingly, and actually I have a very red beard. I don't know if it comes through on the camera, but I'm pretty red bearded. Got earbuds in it. Sounds smooth. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I can turn down music a little bit. When I tested it, it sounded like it was too quiet, so I turned it up. But let me turn it down a smidgen. How's that? Is that a little bit better? Is that helping the vibes? And Connor, if you just brought water to the stream, that's not gonna work. You need a warm beverage. You need to get some honk chocolate, or maybe even some warm saucer of milk like a kitten. It's hot in here. I can't drink. Oh, hoot. It's actually kind of warm in here too, but I still have a hoodie on. I'm just feeling very cozy today. I'm feeling very cozy. So even though I'm a little warm, I'm feeling cozy. It's okay. Sometimes you gotta be too warm, right? I like my warm milk on a saucer as tradition states. Creme a la Edgar. That's from the Aristocats? Or am I imagining things? Let me know if I'm wrong. Oh, it do be. I watched the Aristocats a lot when I was young. I loved that movie. I never had a cat when I was a kid, but I loved the Aristocats. And I watched it when I was older, and I realized that it is kind of a problematic movie in many ways. But good times when you're a kid. And you don't know better. And you don't know anything about the world. Blissfully ignorant of problematic old Disney movies. So, you're still a sweet baby angel boy right today, Dawn. I watched it for the first time last year. Connor, you only watched the Aristocats last year for the first time? Was it when I knew you, you just watched the Aristocats for the first time? I can't believe that. I can't believe that I knew you while you watched Aristocats for the very first time. Can't describe the sound that left me and Jonas when we saw the, Asian cat. Yeah, it's from the 70s. Things were a bit different back then. You guys weren't here when we read Peter Pan on stream. I read Peter Pan, the novel, here on stream, and oh boy, that book was problematic. I kept having to stop and be like, okay guys, let's talk about this. I understand this was... I don't condone this sort of language. I'm just reading the book here. You would have thought I got shot with the face I made. Yeah, a lot of the old Disney movies have scenes that make us uncomfortable these days in 2024. I really liked Pocahontas when I was a child. Like, a lot. Like, Pocahontas was my special interest for a good while as a kid. And I watched it as a grown man a few years back, and I was just appalled. And that movie came out in, like, the 90s. That wasn't even that old. And I was just like, oh, this is bad. I miss the simpler times when there were peepees in all the backgrounds. Yeah, I'm assuming they don't do that anymore. People would, there's the internet now, so they can't get away with that shit these days. They can't get away with that. Like in The Lion King where it said sex in the clouds when, the lion laid down. I think it was like Scar or something. I remember seeing The Lion King in the movie theater, and I was with my mom and my grandma, or maybe I think it was with my mom and my aunt, and they were like, they had heard about the hidden stuff in The Lion King, and they were like giggling about it, like waiting for it to happen, and I was just like, can you shut up? I'm trying to watch these animated lions, and you're causing a ruckus. Causing a freaking ruckus. But they can't get away with that shit anymore. There's way too much internet going on. Hee hee hee, sexy cloud. Donathan, how are you typing so much about sexy clouds while you're allegedly exercising? Oh, my latte is too hot. Alright, so I'll get right into this book. We left off on... We're starting chapter 11 today. Probably do... I'm not sure how many chapters. You know what? I did want to mention, before I get started, last time when we were reading, we didn't run into any, major errors in the book. When we were reading the first portion, there was, a page that was completely skipped and then, duplicated, because, if you weren't here the previous times, this book was reprinted from somebody on Amazon, because it's a public domain book, and apparently it's legal to just write the book and then sell it on Amazon and make a profit off of it. So just some random dude in their basement, I guess, reprinted these books. It's full of typos. There's a bunch of words that are squished together when they should be two words, and there's a bunch of words that have spaces between them when they should be one compound word. But we didn't run into anything major last time, like whole pages being non-existent. But just in case we run into issues again this time, I just wanted to give a heads up, give a little bit of a warning. No one told me to take a test. Today I spent hours painting, and I have this habit of having 2 paint palettes, one real one and the other one is my arm, and now that the paint has dried, my arm hair is suffering the consequences. Why didn't you wash your arm after you finished painting? You kind of brought that on yourself. Nabi, there is going to be a test. The only question on the test is, did you have a good time? And then it's a checkbox. You check yes or no. So I just gave you the answer. It's yes. So you're prepared now. Hope that helps. But we're going to go ahead and get started on chapter 11. And just to recap a little bit of what happened last time, just briefly. The question is, who's a good boy? It's Cassidy. He's not looking cute. He was looking really cute a second ago. I keep trying to get started, but I'm remembering other things I want to say. My cat, Cassidy, he is on medicine. I took him to the vet the other day. He is not very healthy. He's having a bad time. It's really a sad time for him. I hope that he's going to get better. There's no guarantees right now, but today he laid in my little arms and he has some problems. So he was kneading and suckling on my blanket, the orange blanket right behind me, in my arms and purring. And it was honestly really pathetic, but the sweetest thing I've ever seen in my life. I love him so much. I was gonna show him off, but he's facing backward now, so maybe later. He's a little baby. He trusts me. Yeah, he's definitely a little baby. We'll move this back this way a little bit. You can see all his crap on the floor behind me, his scratching pads and shit. Yeah, well, we're hoping he's gonna get better. He's on, I need to give him his medicine, actually. Remind me before we go, somebody please, remind me to give him his medicine, because it's about that time, but he can wait a little bit. Whew. But yeah, no guarantees that he's going to have a long life, but he is going to have a good life as long as he's with me. So that's all we can promise for now. I'm going to take care of him and give him all that he wants in the world. Anyway, chapter 11, my first journey. Oh wait, I wanted to give a recap. I'm going to do it this time. So, Etsuko, the girl in the book, right? She's about 12 years old. She is preparing to be married after her brother has set up an arranged marriage for her, made a match for her. And she's doing all this stuff like learning to cook meals that her husband likes and learning how to sew cushions for the floor. All this stuff that, you know, wives are supposed to do, I guess. And she's going through all this stuff, has barely met this guy, and then finds out that he's had to go to America for work, and now she's going to have to be sent over to America, and her whole life as a rural little 1800s Japanese girl is getting turned on its head. So that's why chapter 11 is called My First Journey. That was one of the long Nagaoka winters. For 5 months, we saw only snow. In the early spring, our relatives in Tokyo had written that arrangements had been made for my school. From that time, I had been waiting impatiently for the mountain roads to become safe from avalanches, for just as soon as we could travel, Brother was to take me to the capital. At last, the dikes were dry. That was where the snow always melted first, and we had a gathering green picnic as a farewell to my companions in Nagaoka. One sunny morning, a group of us, with purple scarves on our heads and kimonos tucked up over our bright skirts, dotted the dike slopes, each carrying a small basket and a bamboo knife, and filling the air with laughter and merry calls as we hurried up and down the banks, trying to see how many different kinds of green each could find. Often in later years, I recall that happy day as my last gay time at home as a girl. Finally, the mail carriers reported that the overhanging snow cliffs had all fallen and the slopes were clear. Soon after came the day of our departure. With a heart half of elation, half of regret, I bade goodbye to honorable grandmother and mother, and with misty eyes was carefully tucked into my jinriksha by Ishi. Then, between lines of bowing friends, our 2 jinrikshas and a baggage-laden horse, baggage-laden was all smashed together and I could not fathom what that word was, and a baggage-laden horse led by a coolie started on the 8 days' journey to Tokyo. Most of the way we traveled in jinrikishas, changing them at certain towns, but occasionally we had to go on horseback. My saddle was a high box seat, so brother and the coolie rigged up a double basket held by bands across the horse's back. I sat in one part, and baggage filled the other. As we went around the steep, curving road on the mountainside, I could lean over and look far, far down to the fisher villages on the coast. But it was more interesting as we got farther along to look across the deep valley to the sloping hillsides with their terraces of rice fields, odd-shaped patches fitted in like the silk pieces of a Buddhist priest's robe. In every little village of thatch-roofed huts was a shrine set high in the midst of a few trees, and, half hidden in a hollow beside a stream, was whirling the great narrow wheel of a rice mill. The air was so clear that I could plainly see the awkward lunge of a water buffalo as he dragged a wooden plow along the furrows of one of the rice patches, and I could even distinguish a scarlet flower stuck between the folds of the towel knotted about the head of the coolie behind. In those days, no one ever wore a living flower except to carry it to the dead, so I knew he was taking it home for the house shrine. I wondered what kind of home he had. I think it was our third day when I noticed that we were leaving the snow country. No longer did the towns have their sidewalks roofed, and these thatches bore no rows of avalanche stones. The houses looked bare and odd, like a married woman's face with newly shaved eyebrows. Okay. But we were not entirely beyond the sight of snow, for as we skirted Miyoko Mountain, we saw a good many drifts and patches. The jinriksha men said snow lasted there until July. From the top, said brother, you can see Fujiyama. My heart thrilled and I foolishly turned my head, feeling for a moment that I was really near the sacred mountain which my eyes had never expected to behold. And then, with a deeper, warmer thrill, I heard the conclusion of his sentence. And then, if you turn and look in the opposite direction, you can see the plains of Etsuko. We are very far from home, I replied in a small voice. Brother gave a quick look at my grave face. Then he laughed. Also, if you look just beyond, you can see the Isle of Sado. If Matsuo should not come up to expectations, here's some advice for you. And his merry voice broke into an old song. Let me see if I have a translation for this, because it's in Japanese. I don't know one of these words, hang on. Traditionally, upper-class Japanese women would shave off their eyebrows just prior to or after their wedding ceremonies. That's something I've never heard before. I wonder when that stopped. Let me see. So I went to look up this song to see if it was an actual, like, traditional song, but the first result I got was One Piece. Let me look up this one word I don't know. I think it's specific to this location, which is why I don't know it, because I'm also, the only results I'm getting are from this book. Anyway, the song says, Nikui otoko ni kisetai shima wa royogashi ni sadogashima. Little Miss Cakes, hello! I hope that you enjoy the dark screen this time. It's here just for you, Hope it's more comfy for you. I'm just kidding. It's not just for you. Everyone else agreed. with you. So hopefully you can be nice and comfy in here and not too disturbed with a bright yellow background. It's going well today. It's going well. How are you doing tonight? Hopefully you've had a nice day. We're knee deep in chapter 11 here. Etsuko is journeying her first journey off to the capital to go to school before she gets sent off to the US to get married to some guy she doesn't know. I was shocked that brother should sing a common servant song, and doubly shocked that he should joke so lightly about serious things, so my face was still grave as we rolled along in our jinrikishas. The Isle of Sado used to be a place of exile for criminals and was considered by common people as the end of the world. This joking song, which is popular among peasant girls, is literally a threat to present to a disliked suitor. Not the pleated garment, which is the usual gift of the bride to the groom, but instead a convict's garb, meaning, I pray the gods will send the unwelcome one across the raging seas to the end of the world. We spent our 5th night at Nagano in the temple of Zenkoji, where lived the royal nun beneath whose high-lifted razor I had walked years before in the procession of gaily clad little girls for a Buddha ceremony of consecration. The next morning, soon after we started, brother halted and allowed my jinriksha to roll up to his side. Etsubo, he asked, when did they give up making a priestess of you? Why, I don't know, I said, surprised. He gave a little scornful laugh and rode on to his place ahead of me, leaving me silent and thoughtful. To the yes, turn around. Yeah, you know, it was a different time. I mean, sometimes you just get sent away to the US when you're a little 12-year-old Japanese girl. Weirder things have happened, right? Honestly, the reason I wanted to read this book was because this little Japanese girl got sent to Ohio, and I grew up in Ohio, so I wanted to see Ohio through an 1800s Japanese girl's point of view. And that's why we're here right now reading this. I had spoken the truth when I said I did not know. I had always accepted my education with no thought of results. But brother's laugh had startled me, and rolling along that mountain road, I did a good deal of thinking. At last I believed that I understood. I know my father had never approved, although he acquiesced in honorable grandmother's wish that I should be educated for a priestess. And when, after my brother's sad departure, he had quietly substituted studies which would be of benefit should I ever hold the position of his heir, I think honorable grandmother, aching with sympathy for her proud, disappointed son, laid aside her cherished hope, and the plan was silently abandoned. In the province of Shinano, an hour or so from Nagano, my jinriksha man pointed across the river to a small wooded mountain. Obatsuyama it is, he said. How my mind went back to Ishii and her mother-love story, which tells of a time long, long ago, where there lived at the foot of this mountain a poor farmer and his aged, widowed mother. They owned a bit of land which supplied them with food, and their humble lives were peaceful and happy. At that time, Shinano was governed by a despotic ruler who, through a brave warrior, had a great and cowardly shrinking from anything suggestive of fading health and strength. This caused him to send out a cruel proclamation. The entire province was given strict orders immediately to put to death all aged people. Those were barbarous days, and the custom of abandoning old people to die was not uncommon. However, it was not a law, and many of the helpless old lived as long as nature allowed in comfortable and welcome homes. The poor farmer loved his aged mother with tender reverence, and the order filled his heart with sorrow. But no one ever thought a second time about obeying the mandate of a daimyo. So, with many deep and hopeless sighs, the youth prepared for what at the time was considered the kindest mode of death. Just at sundown, when his day's work was ended, he took a quantity of the unwhitened rice, which is the principal food of the poor, cooked and dried it, and tying it in a square of cloth, swung the bundle around his neck, along with a gourd filled with cool, sweet water. Then he lifted his helpless old mother to his back and started on his painful journey up the mountain. The road was long and steep. He plodded steadily on, the shadows growing deeper and deeper until the moon, round and clear, rose above the mountaintop and peered pityingly through the branches upon the youth toiling onward, his head bent with weariness and his heart heavy with sorrow. The narrow road was crossed and recrossed by many paths made by hunters and woodcutters. In some places, they mingled in a confused puzzle, but he gave no heed. One path or another, it mattered not. On he went, climbing blindly upward, ever upward, toward the high, bare summit of what is now known as Obatsuyama, the mountain of abandoning the aged. The eyes of the old mother were not so dim out that they noted the reckless hastening from one path to another, and her loving heart grew anxious. Her son did not know the mountain's many paths, and his return might be one of danger, so she stretched forth her hand and, snapping the twigs from the bushes as they passed, She quietly dropped a handful every few steps of the way, so as they climbed, the narrow path behind them was dotted at frequent intervals with tiny piles of twigs. I'm gonna cry about this in real life. At last the summit was reached. Weary and heartsick, the youth gently released his burden and silently prepared a place of comfort as his last duty to the loved one. Gathering fallen pine needles, he made a soft cushion, and tenderly lifting his old mother thereon, he wrapped her padded coat more closely about the stooping shoulders, and with fearful eyes and an aching heart said farewell. I was gonna say, this is killing me. This is awful. Yeah, I think I was talking recently on stream about how I get really sad about old people. I think I was talking about it during Eastward the other day. I will cry. I will cry. Whew. The trembling mother voice was full of unselfish love as she gave her last injunction. Let not thine eyes be blind, my son. The mountain road is full of danger. Look carefully and follow the path which holds the pile of twigs. They will guide thee to the familiar way farther down. The son's surprised eyes looked back over the path, then at the poor old shriveled hands all scratched and soiled by their work of love. His heart smote him, and, bowing to the ground, he cried aloud, "O honorable mother, thy kindness thrusts my heart. I will not leave thee. Together we will follow the path of twigs, and together we will die." Once more he shouldered his burden, how light it seemed now, and hastened down the path, through the shadows and the moonlight, to the little hut in the valley. Beneath the kitchen floor was a walled closet for food, which was covered over and hidden from view. There the son hid his mother, supplying her with everything needful and continually watching and fearing. Like, the daimyo's not going to be in your house every day. I don't think you need to keep her in the floorboards, like, at all times. Like, maybe if you hear somebody knock on the door, or, like, you hear some commotion outside, then be like, yeah, mom, go get down in the floorboards. But I don't think you need to keep your mom down in the floorboards, like, 24/7. That just seems unnecessary. A bunch of babies, me crying like a Studio Ghibli character. I feel like this story, this could be a Ghibli movie, like the start of one. Time passed, and he was beginning to feel safe when again the despot sent forth heralds bearing an unreasonable and useless order, seemingly as a boast of his power. His demand was that his subjects should present him with a rope of ashes. The entire province trembled with dread. The order must be obeyed, yet who in all Shinano could make a rope of ashes? One night, in great distress, the son whispered the news to his hidden mother. "Wait," she said. "I will think." On the second day, she told him what to do. "Make a rope of twisted straw," she said, "then stretch it upon a row of flat stones and burn it there on a windless night." He called the people together and did as she said, and when the blaze had died, behold, upon the stones, with every twist and fibre showing perfect, lay a rope of whitened ashes. The daimyo was pleased at the wit of the youth and praised him greatly, but demanded to know where he had obtained the wisdom. "Alas, alas," cried the farmer, "the truth must be told," and with many deep bows he related his story. The daimyo listened, then meditated in silence. Finally, he lifted his head. "Shinano needs more than the strength of youth," he said gravely. "Ah, that I should have forgotten the well-known saying, 'With the crown of snow there cometh wisdom.'" That very hour the cruel law was abolished, and the custom drifted into so far as past that only the legend remains. As we went further on, I found the custom so different from those of Nagaoka that I felt as if I were already in a strange land. At one place, long before we reached the village, we heard a hoarse voice calling, "Makata? Makata? Is it sold?" And we rolled through the one narrow, crowded street as we saw an auctioneer standing high in the midst of dozens of bamboo baskets of beans, carrots, greens, and bamboo shoots, while lying around him in ungainly confusion were every size and shape of purple eggplant and long, sprawling, delicious lotus roots. Brother looked back and laughed. "Who is he? What are all the people doing?" I asked as soon as we reached the end of the long street and rolled out into the public road. "It is a vegetable auction," Brother explained. "Merchants buy in quantities, and every morning the things are auctioned off by the basketful. Weren't those fine lotus roots? If we hadn't had breakfast only a couple of hours ago, I'd believe I was hungry. At another place we went by a house where death had entered. Before the door stood a funeral palanquin into which coolies with big hats and crest coats were just lifting the heavy wooden bucket containing the body. Over it was thrown a small kimono of scarlet and gold, showing that the dead child must have been a little daughter. The dress would have been white for a son. Around stood a number of white-robed mourners with white towels folded over their hair. As we passed, I caught a glimpse of a screen placed upside down and the lighted candles of a tiny shrine. At one place where the road ran close to the broad river with bold bluffs coming down, in some places almost to the water, we saw a number of odd floating rice mills with turning paddle wheels that looked like a fleet of boats standing motionless in a hopeless struggle against the strong tide. I wondered where, in that rocky country, were enough people to eat all the rice that was being ground. But when we turned away from the river, we suddenly found ourselves in a silk culture district where our road ran through village after village, each having its own mulberry plantation. The town where we expected to spend the night was only a few hours ahead when the sky began to darken with a threatening storm. Brother was casting anxious looks backward when his jinriksha man told him that in the next village was a large house where travelers had sometimes been kept for a night. So we hurried there, the last quarter of an hour being a bouncing, breathless race between men and clouds. The men won, whirling us up to the door, into which we ran unannounced just as the storm broke with a downpour, which it would have been hard to struggle through on the road. It was an odd house where we found the shelter, but I found that even my honorable father, on his journeys in ancient days, never, on any occasion, received a more cordial welcome or a more kindly treatment than did we and our perspiring, laughing, boasting men at the end of our exciting race. I had a thought that I was about to say and then it immediately slipped out of my head, but that was the end of chapter 11. What the hell was I about to say? Oh, I was about to say, she always just says brother. I literally have no idea what her brother's name is. And he's becoming kind of like a major character. But he's never been mentioned by name. He's just named Brother. I wonder if he was maybe mentioned by name in the first chapter when he was very briefly and suddenly introduced. If so, can't remember. Chapter 12, Travel Education. The large, well-cared-for house in which we had taken refuge that stormy night was crowded full of busy workers. With the exception of the living rooms of our host, his wife, and 2 daughters, the entire house was full of skeleton frames containing tiers and tiers of bamboo trays, each holding a network screen covered with silkworms. A network screen? Something tells me this should say netted screen? I wonder if the person who typed this just accidentally typed a network. I gotta leave a review about this on Amazon. I'll let this guy know that he's got some work to do. Don't be mean, his parents named him that. This is my son, brother? Was he your brother or your son? He's my son. He's brother. Each holding a netted screen covered with silkworms. There must have been thousands and thousands of them. I had been accustomed to silkworms all my life. Ishi's home had been in a weaving village, and my elder sister had many silk villages on their 3-mountain estate. But I never before had spent a night in sound of the continual nibbling of the hungry little creatures. Ooh. It filled the whole house with a gentle rustling. Ooh. Exactly like the patter of raindrops on dry leaves. That's bugs. That's bugs you're hearing all night. And I dreamed all night of dripping eaves. The next morning I awakened with a depressing feeling that I was to have a day's ride in a close-shut jinriksha, and was surprised when I pushed back one of the wooden panels of the porch edge to find that the sun was shining. While I was standing there, one of the daughters, about my age, came out carrying a straw mat of silkworm waste to throw in a pile in the yard for the mulberry stems, and rice hulls of silkworm waste makes the best fertilizer in the world, and she stopped to bow good morning. Then she stood there in the June sunshine with her sleeves looped back and her bare feet in straw sandals, and I squatted on the edge of the porch in my home-dyed night kimono, and we got acquainted. She told me that she took care of 6 trays of silkworms all by herself. She seemed to know everything about them, and she loved them. They're clean, she said, and dainty about food, and intelligent about their own affairs, just like people. I was so interested in all the surprising things I heard that I was still listening when a girl came to fold away my bed cushions and I had to hurry to get dressed. Well, said Brother, after my room had been cleaned and breakfast brought in, how do you like living in a boarding house? The boarders are very noisy, I replied, and from what our hostess's daughter told me, they are very particular. She says they cannot endure one particle of dust. Even a withered leaf will sometimes cause one to tie on his blue neckerchief and creep to the outer edge of the tray. Have you seen our host's grandmother? Asked Brother. No, I didn't know there was a grandmother. She went early to her cushions last night, probably to escape the bustle and annoyance of her abrupt arrival. We will pay our respects to her before we leave. When breakfast was over, our host took us to the grandmother's room. She was a very old lady with a reserved manner and a face of more than usual intelligence. As soon as she bowed, I knew that she had been trained in a samurai house, and when I saw the crest of Naginata on the wall rest above the shoji, I knew why Brother had wanted me to come to this room. A naginata is a long, light spear with curved blade which samurai women were taught to use, partly for exercise and partly for defense in case of necessity. This one bore the crest of one of our northern heroes. He was a traitor, but nevertheless he was a hero. When he was killed, his daughter was one of the group, 3 of them women, who defended the sorely pressed castle during the last desperate hours of hopeless struggle. The old lady told us, with modest pride, that she had been a humble attendant of the daughter, and was with her at that dreadful time. The naginatas were a memory gift from her honorable and beloved mistress. Seeing that they were deeply interested, she brought out her other treasures, a slender, blunt knife called a kogai, which, with the throwing dagger, forms part of the hilt of a samurai's long sword. In very ancient days, Japanese warfare was a science. Artistic skill was always displayed in the use of weapons, and no soldier was proud of having wounded an enemy in any other manner than the one established by strict samurai rule. The longsword had for its goal only 4 points: the top of the head, the wrist, the side, and the leg below the knee. The throwing dagger must speed on its way, true as an arrow, direct to the forehead, throat, or wrist. But the blunt little kogai had many uses. It was the key that locked the sword in its scabbard. When double, it could be used as chopsticks by the marching soldier. It has been used on the battlefield or in retreat, mercifully to pierce the ankle vein of a suffering and dying comrade, and it had the unique use in clan feud when found sticking upright in the ankle of a dead foe, of bearing the silent challenge, "I await thy return." Its crest told to whom it belonged, and, in time, it generally was returned to the owner's ankle. The kogai figures in many tales of romance and revenge in the Middle Ages. I was glad to see Brother so interested, and was happy myself at watching the old lady's face flush and light up with her memories, but her closing words made me feel sorry. To some remark of Brother's, she replied, "Youth is always listening eagerly for marching orders, but the aged can only look backward to sad memories and hopeless dreams." As I mounted my jinriksha and bowed again to the entire group of family and servants bowing in the doorway, I could not help sending a thought farewell to the busy little boarders. I had learned more about silkworms during that short rustling visit than in my 14 years of life in the silkworm district. As we rolled along over a smooth, monotonous road, my mind was busy, and I believe that then and there I first began to realize, vaguely, that all creatures, however insignificant, were intelligent about their own affairs, just like people. "Dear me," I finally said to myself, "how much we learn when we travel," and I pulled the jinriksha robe over my lap and settled myself for the long ride ahead. I think I must have gone to sleep, for I found myself crookedly but comfortably snuggled into almost a kinoji when I heard Brother's voice. We were entering a good-sized town, and he was leaning back and pointing across the tiled roofs to the castle on the hill beyond. "This is Komoro," he called, "and there's where the foot-high dolls come from." The foot-high dolls. I smiled as my mind flew back to the Nagaoka home and pictured 2 enormous dolls of the festival set, brought by our Komoro great-great-grandmother with her wedding dowry. In her day, the government permitted only the daughter of a daimyo to own dolls a foot high, and her entire set must have been wondrously handsome. But in my time, when our living came principally from the visits of our second-hand man to our go-down, the wonderful Komoro dolls, with their miniature furniture of gold and lacquer, the perfection of Japanese art of the Middle Ages, gradually found new homes. They went, I know, to no go-down of Japan, but through some shrewd dealer into foreign lands, and probably today are calmly resting in widely scattered homes and museums of Europe or America. Two of the dolls had become defaced in some way, and thus being unsaleable, they were placed as ornaments on the high tokonoma shelf in my room. I was very fond of acting out scenes of the stories that were told me, and used to take down the dolls and use them as an audience while I strutted around the room representing an ancient samurai with some fearful duty to perform. The dolls' heads were movable, and thus supplied a splendid opportunity for a favorite revenge story of mine. Many a time I had placed my hand on one of the enameled heads, and, with my ivory paper knife as a sword, have struck fiercely at the doll, at the same instant lifting out the head from its collar of rich brocade. Then, with stern, set face, I would hurriedly wrap the head in a purple square of crepe, and tucking it under my arm stride boldly off to an imaginary courtroom. I suspect my father knew of this barbarous game of mine, for I always borrowed his purple crepe fuchsia for this purpose, feeling that something belonging to him would give dignity to the occasion, but I never heard honorable grandmothers step onto the porch that I did not quickly restore the head to its brocade nest in order to save her another anxious fear that I was growing too bold and rough ever to find a husband. Iconic, yeah. This little girl's so funny. She's such a, I mean, it's probably like, she's just a typical child, but like times are different and you're just like, yes, girls must do this and you must learn to be a good wife, but like all kids are gonna be like this. Doesn't matter what gender you are. You're gonna have some fucked up doll beheading situations going on. Who didn't, am I right? As our jinrikishas rolled through the town, I looked up at the castle with interest. And this was the home from which our Komoro grandmother had gone forth on her wedding journey to Nagaoka. Half buried in trees it stood, the gray, tipped-up corners of many roofs peeping through the branches. It looked like a broad, low pagoda towering above a slanting wall of six-sided stones, the tortoise back of all Japanese castles. From Komoro to Nagaoka, it must have seemed a long trip to the young girls in the teetering bridal kago. I thought of what honorable grandmother had told me of her own month-long bridal trip. And then I looked ahead. The Itsumo gods, who plan all marriages, had decreed the same fate for many brides of our family, and so far as my own future was planned, I seemed destined to follow in the footsteps of my ancestors. At one place where we had to take kagos, I disgraced myself. I dreaded a kago. The big basket swinging from the shoulders of the trotting coolies always made me dizzy and faint. But that day it was raining hard and the mountain path was too rough for a jinriksha. I stood things as bravely as I could, but finally I became so sick that brother had the baggage taken off the horse and, wedging me in between cushions in its back, covered me with a tent made of straw mat, and disdaining comfort for himself, walked all the way up the mountain beside me, the coolie following with the two kagos. At the top the sun was shining, and when I peeped from my tent, brother was shaking himself as my poor Shiro used to do when drenched with rain. I ventured to apologize in a shamed voice. Kago sickness is a great absorber of pride, Etsubo. I'm afraid you have lost your right to be called your father's brave son. I laughed, but my cheeks were hot. As he held me to the ground, brother pointed toward a wide-spreading cloud of smoke floating lazily above a cone-shaped mountain. This is the signpost for the robber station, he said. Do you remember? Indeed I did. Many times I'd heard father tell the story of the small hotel at the top of the mountain, where the rates were so high that people called it the robber station. I was a big girl before I learned that it was a very respectable stopping place and not a den of thieves where money was extorted from travelers as a tribute. We walked down the mountain passing several cave shrines. In one, I caught the twinkle of a burning lamp. It reminded me of the hermit caves of Etsuko. This was my first long trip from home, and it was full of strange new experiences. Yet there seemed to be familiar memories connected with everything. I wondered vaguely if I should find it so in America. One day after a shower, as the man stopped to lower the top of my jinriksha, a sudden burst of sunshine showed me, high up on the mountainside, pressed flat against the green, an immense white dai, the Japanese character meaning great. It looked as if it had been painted with a brush, but Gia, who had once been there, had told me that it was made of strips of bamboo covered thickly with paper prayers, tied on by pilgrim visitors to the temple on top of the mountain. Nearby was the rude little village where Mio lived. She was Gia's sister, and we spent the night in her house. It was a queer place, a sort of cheap hotel for country people. Mio, with her son and his wife, met us at the door, with deep bows and many a ma of surprise and pleasure. The wide entrance opened to a big room having a clay floor. Several casks bound with hoops of twisted bamboo were piled in one corner, and from the smoky ceiling hung a bulging bag of grain, bunches of mochi cakes and dried fish, and bamboo baskets containing provisions of various kinds. Queer and cheap? Sign me up! I don't know, it might not be the kind of queer and cheap you're looking for, but I'll sign you up. I'm gonna send a note over to Mio right now. Connor's on the way. Get your queer and cheap room ready for him. We passed through a mob of chattering pilgrims who had just come down from the mountain, and crossing the stones of a crude little garden, reached the rooms where Mio lived. Everything was clean, but the paper doors were patched, the mats yellow with age, and the cloth bindings worn almost through. Mio must have had a rather hard time in the past, for she was an independent character who, in violation of all tradition, had cast off a worthless husband and brought up 4 children herself. It does sound pretty queer in here. It sounds like this is a they were roommates situation. Who knows? Of course, it was very low class to do a thing like that, but she was as brave as a man, and since her husband had no parents, she had been able to legally keep the children herself. Mio had been a servant in our house when brother was a child, and her delight in seeing the young master was pathetic. Her bare feet went pattering over the mats, slipping quickly into their sandals each time she crossed the door sills to the kitchen. She hurried here and there, bringing us the best she had and offering everything with bows and apologies. One thing troubled her very much. She had only wooden trays with no feet, and she had never known my brother to eat off a low tray. In the days when she lived at our house, even an informal serving of cake was presented to him on a high lacquer stand, just as it was to father. But she was ingenious, and presently she brought a brass-bound rice bucket, and with many bows and an anxious, "Please grant your honorable pardon," placed the tray on it before brother. He laughed heartily and said that even a shogun had never received a similar honor. We sat up very late and had a most interesting time. Brother talked of past days and of many things about our home, so little known to me that I felt as if I were reading some old half-familiar book. I had never known him to be so free and merry as he was that evening. And Mio, half laughter and half tears, talked rapidly, asking many questions and interrupting herself continually. She was reminding him of some incident of his childhood when he abruptly asked, "What became of your own choice, husband, Mio?" I thought that question was too cruel, but Mio calmly replied, "Young master, the rust of one's own sword can be brightened only by one's own effort. I am still paying the penalty of my life mistake." I thought that question... Oh. I was starting to read the wrong sentence again. Whoops. Very gravely, she went across the room to the big chest and took out a small, flat package. It was a square of purple crepe bearing our crest. With a serious face, she unfolded it, showing a brocade charm bag such as we children used to wear to hold the paper blessing of the priest. The gold threads were a little raveled, and the heavy scarlet cord mellowed with age. Mio lifted it reverently to her forehead. "The honorable mistress gave it to me," she said to brother, "the night she let my lover and me through the water gate. It held square silver coins, all that I needed." "Ah," brother exclaimed excitedly, "I know, I was a little boy. It was dark and I saw her coming back alone carrying a lantern, but I never understood what it meant." Mio hesitated a moment, then she told us. When she was employed in our house, she was very young, and because she was the sister of father's faithful Gia, she was allowed much freedom. A youthful servant, also of our house, fell in love with her. For young people to become lovers without the sanction of proper formalities was a grave offense in any class, but in a samurai household, it was a black disgrace to the house. The penalty was exile through the water gate, a gate of brush built over a stream and never used except by one of the etta, or the outcast class. The departure was public, and the culprits were ever after shunned by everyone. The penalty was unspeakably cruel, but in the old days, severe measures were used as a preventative of law-breaking. Mother always rigidly obeyed every law of the household, but she saved Mia from public disgrace by taking the lovers quietly at midnight and herself opening the big, swinging gate for them to pass. No one ever knew the truth. It is said, concluded Mio sadly, that the hearts of those who pass the water gate are purified by the gods. But even so, the penalty of a lawbreaker can never be evaded. In secret, I have paid the penalty, and my children were saved from disgrace by the heavenly kindness of the honorable mistress of the Inagaki. Exiled because of getting bitches. What a way to go, right? If you're like a servant in the household and you're not allowed to like become lovers with the other servants of the household, I'm assuming that nobody's matchmaking for the servants, right? How do they get a marriage arranged for them? I don't know if marriage arrangement was common for like the lower class, like obviously for the higher class, like the samurai class here, that's normal, but for the servants, what are they actually supposed to do? Do their own families, like, when they hit a certain age, like, arrange a marriage for them and, like, call them back home? I don't know. Because it seems like she has the servants in her household and they're just chilling. Like, I don't think they're married or anything. They just don't get to have a life. They're just servants forever. Probably. That sounds right. We all sat quiet for a moment. Then Brother said bitterly, "The honorable mistress of Inagaki was many times more merciful to the servants of her household than to her one and only son." Damn, brother, you're being kind of a bitch. Impatiently, he pushed his cushion aside and abruptly said goodnight. The next morning, our road wound along the side of the mountain stream, awkwardly threading its way through a series of angular gullies, finally ending abruptly in a swift, sloping leap into a wide, shallow river, which we crossed on a boat pulled by coolies. The river was the scene of one of Gia's most exciting stories. Father, on one of his hurried trips to Tokyo, had found it flooded and had ordered his coolies to place his palanquin on a platform and carry it over their heads through the whirling waves to the opposite shore. One man was drowned. Bro, it ain't a competition, right? Also, like, I don't know, man, you're high class. You're supposed to be like, oh, I'm a samurai heir. You're kind of acting a little petty. Be a little bit better. Be a little bit better, man. Yeah, he probably doesn't see this person as a human, though. Just a servant. But what do I know? As our jinrikishas rolled along, I thought of how often Father had gone over that road amidst the state and pomp of old Japan. And now his two dear ones, his eldest and his youngest, were following the same path in rented jinrikishas, simply garbed and with no attendants except a wheezy old coolie with a baggage horse. How strange it seemed. At last we reached Takasaki, the place from which the celebrated land steamer started on its puffing way to Tokyo. That was the first time that I ever saw a railway train. It looked to me like a long row of little rooms, each with a narrow door opening to the platform. It was late in the afternoon, and I was so weary that I have little recollection of anything except a scolding from Brother, because I, feeling that I was entering some kind of a house, stepped out of my wooden shoes, leaving them on the platform. Just before the train started, they were handed in at the window by an official whose special duty it was to gather all the shoes from the platform before starting of every train. I went to sleep at once, and the next thing I knew, we were in Tokyo. She didn't have to tell him the truth, and yet she did, and he was a bitch. I'm so glad that you're being so warm and welcoming to Nightbot. Thank you so much for letting him know that he's welcome here. He's a newcomer to the stream, a new follower to the channel. Nightbot, welcome. Glad to have you here. Thank you for all that you do. Hugs and kisses to Nightbot. Oh, that was the end of the chapter. I was so distracted about hugs and kisses to Nightbot. They're in Tokyo. Goodness. How's everyone doing? Anyone need a tea refill? I almost do. I still got about this much, though. You think I can hold out for another chapter? It's getting a little cold. What if I'm reading and my poor throat has no tea to wet itself with? No, we'll hold out a little bit. Water? You're right, but my water is empty. So... it is what it is. I'm more on a I want a sandwich and Coke moment. Oh gosh, you need a snack break? Connor? You're gonna have to take me with you. And my kettle's actually still hot, because I have the fancy kettle, so I've left it to sit and be hot while I read, so that if I need more tea, I can just go grab it lickety-split. Lickety-split, like, almost instantly. Chapter 13. Foreigners. Oh yeah, they're in Tokyo now. They're probably gonna experience some strange things. I'll get tea when I'm good and ready to get tea, but yes, bring me to the kitchen whenever you're ready. I'll look around your kitchen, I'll peek out of my stream like this. And look through your fridge for you. My Tokyo relatives had arranged for me to live with them and attend a celebrated school for girls where English was taught by a man who had studied in England. This I did for several months, but my brother was not satisfied. The girls were required to give much attention to etiquette and womanly accomplishments, and since my uncle lived in a stately mansion, a great part of my time at home was occupied with trifling formalities. Brothers said that I was receiving the same useless training that had been given him, and since I was to live in America, I must have a more practical education. Once more, my poor brother was totally misunderstood by our kindred on account of his stubborn opposition to all advice, but finally, father's old friend Major Sato suggested a mission school that his wife had attended and which bore the reputation of being the best girls' school for English in Japan. This pleased brother, and since it was the rule of the school that each pupil should have a resident guardian, Major Sato accepted the responsibility, and it was arranged that, until the beginning of the next term, some weeks away, I should be a member of the Sato household. Major Sato's wife was a quiet, gentle lady, unassuming in manner, but with a hidden strength of character most unusual. Having no daughter, she accepted me as her own and in numberless kind ways taught me things of lasting value. Imagine being married and your husband immediately leaves to the USA and you have to study stuck up in Tokyo. I'd kill myself. She's not even married yet. Like, her wedding hasn't even happened yet. She's only, like, betrothed. So, like, it's worse than that. Like, she's like, yeah, everyone's like, yeah, you're gonna get married to this guy. We had this ceremony. Now you guys are betrothed. And he's gone now. So, like, instead of just finding you a new husband who's here, we're just gonna prepare you to get sent to America, which you don't want to go to, but, you know, you just gotta do whatever. Seems really strange. Seems really, like, inconvenient. But I guess you can't break the betrothal, so what do? You just go to America, I guess. It was a 5-mile walk to school from the Sato house. In very bad weather, I was sent in Mrs. Sato's jinriksha, but true to my dear priest-teacher's training, I felt that it was almost a disgrace to consider bodily comfort when on the road to learning, so I usually walked. Starting immediately after an early breakfast, I went down the hill and along an old temple road until I reached a broad street passing the palace of His Imperial Majesty. I always walked slowly there. The clear water of the moat, reflecting every stone of the sloping wall and the crooked pine trees above, formed a picture of calm, unhurried peace. It was the only place I had seen in Tokyo that gave me the familiar feeling of ceremonious dignity. I loved it. From there, I came out upon the wide, sunny-shine parade ground. There was a solitary tree standing just in the center where I always rested a few minutes, for beyond was a long climb through a series of narrow, crooked, uphill streets crowded with children, almost everyone having a baby on its back. These city children did not have the carefree manner of the street children of Nagaoka. They were older and graver, and although all were busy, some playing games, some chattering in groups, and some jogging along on errands, there was little noise except the gata-gata of their wooden clogs. Anytime I remember this as an autobiography, I get so sad for this girl. I mean, it's kind of an adventure, though. It's really cool that she wrote it all. I am grateful for that. I mean, she could have just had all this happen to her and then said, fuck it, no one needs to know. At the top of the hill was my school. It stood behind a long mound wall topped with a thorn hedge. A big gateway opened into a spacious ground where, in the midst of several trees, stood a long, two-storied wooden house with a tiled roof and glass windows divided into large squares by strips of wood. In that building, I spent 4 happy years and learned some of the most useful lessons of my life. I liked my school from the first, but some of my experiences were very puzzling. Had it not been for the constant sympathy and wise advice of kind Mrs. Sato, my life might have been difficult, for I was only a simple country girl alone in a new world, looking about me with very eager but very ignorant eyes, and stubbornly judging everything by my own unreasonably high standards of conservative opinion. All of our studies except English and Bible. They're teaching this girl the Bible? I guess she has to go to America, so they gotta teach her the Bible. But like, this school isn't like a prepare to go to America school, it's just a teaching English school. You guys really gotta learn the Bible? She should have been watching Nyan Cat and playing with Littlest Pet Shop, and instead she was taking school seriously by walking there. What do you think were the memes of the time? The what year is this? 1870s? 1880s? I forget what year this takes place in. But I don't know what kind of memes they had back then. They definitely probably had some kind of like popular toy though. All of our studies except English and Bible were taught by Japanese men, not priests, but professors. Since they came only for their classes, we saw little of them. The foreign teachers were all women. I had seen one foreign man in Nagaoka. I can't hold my book for some reason. My hands just don't work. I had seen one foreign man in Nagaoka, but until I came to this school, I had never seen a foreign woman. These teachers were all young, lively, most interesting and beautiful. Their strange dress, the tight black shoes, the fair skin untouched by the cosmetics which we considered a necessary part of dressing, and the various colors of hair arranged in loose coils and rolls were suggestive of dim visions I had had about fairyland. I admired them greatly, but their lack of ceremony surprised me. The girls, most of whom were from Tokyo, where living was less formal than my old-fashioned home, made very short bows and had most astonishing manners in talking with one another. Nevertheless, I had certain interest in watching them, but the free actions of the teachers with the pupils and the careless conduct of the girls in the presence of the teachers shocked me. I had been taught such precepts as, step not even the shadow of thy teacher, but walk reverently 3 steps behind. And every day I saw familiar greetings and heard informal conversations that seemed to me most undignified on the part of the teacher and lacking in respect on the part of the pupil. And there was another thing which troubled me greatly. Friendly smiles and small attentions from the teachers seemed to be liked by these city girls, but I shrank indescribably from personal advances made to myself. My rigid training held me back from being even mildly responsive to either teachers or schoolmates, and it was a long time before the strangers wore away and I found myself joining with the girls in their games and beginning to feel acquainted with my teachers. This was helped along greatly by certain democratic rules in the school, which, though not enforced, were encouraged and became the fashion. One of these was giving up the use of the honorific sama and substituting the less formal prefix o, thus placing the girls on a plane of social equality. Another, which greatly interested me, was the universal agreement to give up arranging the hair in Japanese style. All wore it alike, pulled back from the face, and hanging in a long braid behind. This change was a mixed pleasure. I was no longer a martyr to the gluing up process of scented oil and hot tea, but as I was the only curly-haired girl in the school, I could not escape a certain amount of good-natured ridicule. 1872, a man said to a preacher, "That was an excellent sermon, but it was not original." The preacher was taken back. The man said he had a book at home containing every word the preacher used. The next day, the man brought the preacher a dictionary. Not Japanese, but I guess back then humor was generally stupid. Brought back a dictionary. Was it from 1872? I guess that's the times. I guess that's the times. These things I accepted with ease, but my shoes were a real annoyance. All my life I had been accustomed to leave my shoes at the door whenever I stepped inside a house, but here in the school we wore our sandals all the time, except in the straw-matted dormitory. I was slow to adapt myself to this, and it was months before I conquered the impulse to slip back my toes from the cord when I reached the door of the classroom. The girls used to wait outside just to laugh at my moment's hesitation. These changes in my lifelong habits, combined with the merry ridicule of the girls, made me feel that I was one of them, and that Etsuko had slipped entirely out of the old life and was now fitted happily into the new. Nevertheless, there were times when, aroused from deep study by someone suddenly calling, "Oh, Etsu-san," and after a dazed moment of adjusting myself to the new name, I would hurry down the hall, my sandals sounding a noisy clap-clap on the floor, and my head feeling light with the cool looseness of unbound hair. I would be vaguely conscious, somewhere within me, of an odd fear that Etsuko was nowhere. Just for that, I would condemn him to hell. Sorry, man. You're going to hell. There's nothing I can do. I don't make the rules. I'm just the preacher. To hell with you. To hell with you. However, this feeling could never last long, for there was a dreaded something which constantly reminded me that I was still a daughter of Ichigo. My pronunciation of certain sounds, which was different from that of Tokyo, caused considerable amusement among the girls. Also, I suppose I used rather stately and stilted language, which, combined with the odd Ichigo accent, must have sounded very funny to city-bred ears. The girls were so good-natured in their mimicry that I could not feel resentment, but it was a real trial to me, for it touched my deep loyalty to my own province. Since I did not quite understand where the difficulty lay, I was helpless and gradually got in the habit of confining my conversation to few remarks and making my sentences as short as possible. Mrs. Sato noticed that I was growing more and more silent, and by tactful questioning she discovered the trouble. Then she quietly prepared a little notebook with a diagram of the troublesome sounds and, in the kindest way in the world, explained them to me. Brother was there that evening, and he laughed. "Etsubo," he said, looking at me rather critically, "there is not such good reason to be shamed by the accent of an honorable province as over your countrified dress. I must get you some different clothes." I had already grown suspicious of the glances which my schoolmates had been casting at the sash that Toshi had so painstakingly made me of a piece of newly imported cloth called arapaka, so I was glad to accept the garments which brother brought the next day. They were surprisingly gay, and the sash, with one side of black satin, reminded me of the restaurant waiters of Nagaoka, but the girls all said they had a Tokyo air, so I wore them with the pride and satisfaction greater than I ever had felt about clothes, except one. That was many years before, when my father, on one of his visits to the capital, had seen in a store of foreign clothes for a child and had brought them home for me. They were of dark blue cloth and very peculiar in shape. None of us knew they were clothes for a little boy. Ishii dressed me and I strutted about, cramped into a straitjacket of cold, tight, scratchy discomfort. But the family admired me, the servants watched me with indrawn breaths of awe, and I was proud as the bird of many eyes, which is the symbol of vanity. The more I saw of my teachers, the more I admired them. I had lost my feeling of repulsion at their lack of ceremony when I learned to understand the hidden dignity that lay beneath their individual differences, and finally it began to dawn upon me that the honorable position of instructor was not inconsistent with being merry and gay. My Japanese teachers had been pleasantly courteous, but always lofty and distant in manner, while the smiling, swift-moving creatures ran with us in the gymnasium, played battledore and shuttlecock with us, and took turns in eating with us in our own dining room, where Japanese food was served on trays as it was on our small tables at home. Often on Friday evenings, we were allowed to arrange a Japanese program of entertainment. We would bring out our bright undergarments, which were the gayest part of Japanese dress, and hang them across the room, where they swayed in long curves suggesting the broad striped and crest curtains stretched by ancient warriors in camp. Then we would borrow things of each other to make costumes for tableaux or character sketches of celebrated people. Sometimes a daring girl would select a teacher, but always a favorite, and pleasantly caricature her. Occasionally we gave a pantomime of an old historic drama, but we never acted with words. That would have been too bold and unladylike. Even in the theaters, women's parts were taken by men, for our stage was not yet far removed from the time when actors were called beggars on the shore. Moving to the city is never easy. The part about the accent honestly makes me tear up a bit. Yeah, I feel sad that she like decided to become quiet and, reserved rather than, I don't know, own it. It sucks to be different, especially since she's curly haired too. That also makes her different. She's a weird one. She's a weird one. But it sounds like she's getting along with the other girls finally after she tried to change herself for them to like her more. Totally fine. It's totally fine. Whew. The teachers were always present on these occasions, laughing, applauding, and praising our efforts as freely and happily as if they were girls of our own age. And at the same time, they were all busy knitting and sewing. Or, most interesting of all the things in that wonderful school, darning stockings. But in spite of my steadily increasing contentment, there was one thing that was a constant ache to me. Neither at that school nor at the Sato home was there a shrine. Of course, there were prayers at morning service and in the school chapel, and they were very beautiful and solemn. I always felt as if I were in the temple, but they lacked the warm homeliness of our family gathering in honorable grandmother's quiet room, which the lighted candles and curling incense at the open shrine, and the consciousness of the nearby protecting presence of the ancestors. This I missed more than anything else. As an added grief was that I could have no part in the service held on the 29th of each month in memory of my father's death day. Before I left home, Mother had given me a very sacred thing. It was my father's death name written on a certain kind of paper by my revered priest teacher. Preciously, I had carried this with me wherever I went, but after I became a boarder in the school, I had a vague feeling that for me to keep it there permanently would be disloyal to the sacred name, and also discourteous to the school, for it would be the intruding of something of the old into an atmosphere which belonged only to the new. I felt I could not keep it, and yet I could not part with it. I was sorely puzzled. One weekend I went to visit Mrs. Sato. It was the 29th day of the month. We were sewing, and our cushions were drawn close to the opening doors overlooking the garden. I had dropped my work and was thinking. My unseeing eyes gazed out at a path of stepping stones that ran between two little hills and around a big stone lantern before disappearing in a group of small trees. "What are you thinking, Oetsu-san?" asked Mrs. Sato. "You look worried." Turning, I saw real concern on her face. Perhaps under the influence of the school, my reserve was beginning to melt. At any rate, I told her of my trouble. At once, she was all sympathy. "I am ashamed that we have no shrine," she said, "for we have not even the excuse of being Christians. We are nothing. It is the fashion lately to adopt the Western way, and we have no house shrine. But there is one in the nun's house at the end of the garden." "The nun's house at the end of the garden?" I repeated in great astonishment. She explained that the land on which they lived had once belonged to an old temple where priestesses were in charge, which, on account of the changing times, had grown very poor. The property had been sold to Major Sato on condition that a little thatched hut, once belonging to a temple servitor, should be allowed to remain as the home of a very old and very holy nun who wished to spend her life in this much-loved spot. That evening we went to see her, walking over the stepping stones between the little hills and around the stone lantern to where, through the foliage, I could see a small house surrounded by a low brush fence. Faint candlelight twinkled through the paper doors, and I heard gentle, familiar tong-tong, tong-tong of the soft wooden drum and the low chanting of Buddhist words. I bowed my head, and in the darkness, homesick tears came to my eyes. Mrs. Sato opened the humble bamboo gate. "Pardon, may we enter?" she called gently. The chanting ceased. The door slid back, and a kindly-looking, very aged nun in a gray cotton robe welcomed us most cordially. This room was simply furnished, except that on one side stood a very beautiful temple shrine of gilded lacquer. It was darkened by age and constant incense smoke. Before the gilded Buddha lay a pile of worn chanting books and the small wooden drum we had heard. The nun was gentle and sweet like my grandmother, and it was easy for me to explain my trouble and show her the paper holding the sacred name. Lifting it to her forehead, she took it to her shrine and reverently placed it before the Buddha. Then we had a simple service, such as we used to have in Honorable Grandmother's room at home, and when I came away, I left the precious paper in the safekeeping of her shrine. After that, on the last Friday of every month, I used to visit the holy nun and listen to her soft voice chant the service in memory of Father's death there. Okay, that's the end of chapter 13. Oh my gosh, Cassidy is coming down from his perch. I'm gonna take a quick break to grab some more tea, and we'll do one more chapter here. It's another several pages. We'll do one more chapter. But I'll be right back in about probably 2 minutes, maybe 30 seconds. I don't know what my be right back screen is on this, because I haven't used this scene collection in a while. But I'm gonna put it on. There's no fun game for you to play. We're not in the modern time. This is vintage hate beat, so bear with whatever I'm about to put up. tea. He's got food. He was really late for dinner. I feel a little guilty. Sorry, little baby Cassidy. Today's read has been so good. Oh my god. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Yeah, it's kind of picking up a lot. I'm a little surprised to find that we're closing in on about the halfway point of the book. Well, maybe not quite, but getting close to halfway, probably about like 45% of the book. And we're not even in the US yet. I'm surprised by that. But I can't wait to see what happens. I think we'll probably just do one more chapter. I do have some more stuff to do tonight, and it's about 10 right now. So one more chapter, and then hopefully you guys will all be tucked in, ready to sleep, eyes closed, peaceful, you know, ready to have a great rest of your existence on this evening. I guess for a lot of you, it's already past midnight, so it's tomorrow, but I'm trying to give you the rest of your today being good. Chapter 14 is called Lessons. Our time in school was supposed to be equally divided between Japanese and English, but since I had already carefully drilled in Japanese studies, I was able to put my best efforts in English. My knowledge of that language was very limited. I could read and write a little, but my spoken English was scarcely understandable. I had, however, read a number of translations of English books, and more valuable than all else, I possessed a supply of scattered knowledge obtained from a little set of books that my father had brought me from the capital when I was only a child. They were translations compiled from various sources and published by one of the progressive book houses of Tokyo. I do not know whose idea it was to translate and publish those 10 little paper volumes, but whoever it was holds my lasting gratitude. They brought the first shafts of light that opened to my eager mind the wonders of the Western world, and from them I was led to countless other friends and companions who, in the years since, have brought to me such a wealth of knowledge and happiness that I cannot think what life would have been without them. How well I remember the days they came. Father had gone to Tokyo on one of his window-toward growing days of trips. That was always an important event in our lives, for he brought back with him not only the wonderful stories of his journey, but also gifts of strange and beautiful things. Mother had said that he would be home at the close of the day, and I spent the afternoon sitting on the porch step, waiting the slow... Why are these words so mashed together? Watching the slow lengthening shadows of the garden trees. I had placed my high wooden clogs on a stepping stone just at the edge of the longest shadow, and as the sun crept farther, I moved them from stone to stone, following the sunshine. I think I must have had a vague feeling that I could thus hasten the slanting shadows in the long straight line, which would mean sunset. At last, and before the shadow had quite straightened, I hurriedly snatched up the clogs and clattered across the stones, for I had heard the jinriksha man's cry of "Okaeri" just outside the gate. I could scarcely bear my joy, and I have a bit of guilt in my heart, yet when I recall how crookedly I pushed those clogs into the neat box of shelves in the shoe-off alcove in the vestibule. The next moment the men, perspiring and laughing, came trotting up to the door where we, servants and all, were gathered, our heads bowed to the floor, all in a quiver of excitement and delight, but of course everybody gravely saying the proper words of greeting. Then, my duty done, I was caught up in my father's arms, and we went to honorable grandmother, who is the only one of the household who might wait in her room for the coming of the master of the house. That day was one of the memory stones of my life, for among all of the wonderful and beautiful things that were taken from the willow wood boxes straddled over the shoulders of the servants was the set of books for me. I can see them now. 10 small volumes of tough Japanese paper tied together with silk cord and marked Tales of the Western Seas. They held extracts from Peter Parley's World History, National Reader, Wilson's Readers, and many short poems and tales from classic authors in English literature. The charm of delight that rare things give came to me during the days and weeks, even months and years from those books. I can recite whole pages of them now. There was a most interesting story of Christopher Columbus. It was not translated literally, but adapted so that the Japanese mind would readily grasp the thought without being buried in a puzzling mass of strange customs. All facts of the wonderful discovery were stated truthfully, but Columbus was pictured as a fisher lad, and somewhere in the story there figured a lacquer bowl and a pair of chopsticks. I would really love to read that. I would really, really love to read that story. These books had been my inspiration during all my years of childhood, and when, in my study of English at school, my clumsy mind began to grasp the fact that, hidden beneath the puzzling words, were continuations of stories I knew, and of ideas similar to those I had found in my old familiar books that I had loved so well, my delight was unbounded. Then I began to read eagerly. I would bend over my desk, hurrying, guessing, skipping whole lines, stumbling along, my dictionary wide open beside me, but I not having time to look and yet in some marvelous way catching ideas. And I never wearied. The fascination was like that of a moon-gazing party, where, while we watched from the hillside platform, a floating cloud would sail across the glorious disk, and we, silent, trembling with excitement, would wait for the glory of the coming moment. In the same way, a half-hidden thought, elusive, tantalizing, would fill me with a breathless hope that the next moment light would come. Another thing about English books was that, as I read, I was constantly discovering shadowy replies to the unanswered questions of my childhood. Oh, English books were a source of deepest joy. I am afraid that I should not have been so persistent or so successful in my English studies could I have readily obtained translations of the books I was so eager to read. Tokyo bookshops at the time were beginning to be flooded with translations of English, French, German, and Russian books. And these generally, if not scientific trees, were classics translated as a rule by our best scholars, but they were expensive to purchase and difficult for me to obtain in any other way. To read, even stumblingly, in the original, the books in the school library were my only resource, and it became one of my greatest pleasures. Accepting English, all of my studies... They're messing up some commas in here. Accepting English, all of my studies, history was my favorite. Accepting English, all of my studies, history was my favorite. I think they messed up this sentence. Anyway, she's saying that history is her favorite subject besides English. And I liked and understood best the historical books of the Old Testament. The figurative language was something like Japanese. The old heroes had the same virtues and the same weaknesses as our ancient samurai. The patriarchal form of government was like ours, and the family system based upon it pictured so plainly of our homes that the meaning of many questioned passages was far less puzzling to me than were the explanations of the foreign teachers. In my study of English literature, it seems odd that, of all the treasures that I gathered, the one which has been most lasting as a vivid picture is that of Tennyson's Dora. Probably this was because of its having been used as a famous Japanese writer as the foundation of a novel called Tamina no Himeyuri, Lily of the Valley. The story of Dora being a tale of the firstborn of an aristocratic family disinherited because he loved a rustic lass of humble class, and the subsequent tragedy resulting from the difference in training of different social circles, was a tale familiar and understandable to us. It was skillfully handled, the author with wonderful word pictures adapting Western life and thought to Japanese conditions. The Lily of the Valley appeared at just the time when the young minds of Japan, both high and humble, was beginning to seek emancipation from the Stoic philosophy, which for centuries had been the core of our well-bred training, and it touched the heart of the public. The book rushed with a storm of popularity all throughout the land and was read by all classes, and, which was unusual, by both men and women. It is said that Her Imperial Majesty became so interested in reading it that she sat up all one night while her court ladies, sitting silent in the next room, wearily waited. I think it was my third year in school that a wave of excitement over love stories struck Tokyo. All the schoolgirls were wildly interested. When translations were to be had, we passed them from hand to hand through the school, but mostly we had to struggle along in English, picking out love scenes from the novels and poems in our school library. Enoch Arden was our hero. We were familiar with loyalty and sacrifice on the part of a wife and understood perfectly why Annie should have so long withstood the advances of Philip, though the unselfishness of the faithful Enoch was so rare as to be much appreciated. The hearts of Japanese girls are no different from those of girls of other countries, but for centuries, especially in samurai homes, we had been strictly trained to regard duty, not feeling, as the standard of relations between man and woman. Thus, our unguided reading sometimes gave us warped ideas on this unknown subject. The impression I received was that love as pictured in Western books was interesting and pleasant, sometimes beautiful in sacrifice like that of Enoch Arden, but not to be compared in strength, nobility, or loftiness of spirit to the affection of parent for child or the loyalty between lord and vassal. Had my opinion been allowed to remain wordless, it probably would never have caused me annoyance, but it was destined to see the light. We had a very interesting literature society which held, on occasion, special meeting to which we invited the teachers as guests. With an anxious pride to have a fine entertainment, we frequently planned our program first and afterwards selected the girls for the various tasks. The result was that sometimes the subjects chosen was beyond the capacity of the girl to handle. At one time, this rule brought disaster to me, for we never shirked any duty to which we were assigned. On this occasion, I was asked to prepare a 3-page essay in English, having one of the cardinal virtues for a subject. I puzzled over which to select of faith, hope, charity, love, prudence, and patience, but recalling that our Bible teacher frequently quoted, "God is love," I felt that there I had a foundation, and so chose as my topic as love. I began with the love of the Divine Father, then, under the influence of my late reading, I drifted along rather vaguely, I fear, on the effect of love on the lives of celebrated characters in history and poetry. But I did not know how to handle so awkward a subject and reached my limit in both knowledge and vocabulary before the 3 pages were filled. Faithfulness to duty, however, still held firm, and I wrote on, finally concluding with these words: "Love is like a powerful medicine. When properly used, it will prove a pleasant tonic, and sometimes may even preserve life. But when misused, it can ruin nations, as seen in the lives of Cleopatra and the beloved empress of the Emperor Genso of Great China." At the close of my reading, one teacher remarked, "This is almost desecration." It was years before I understood what the criticism meant. For a while, my great interest in English reading filled all of my hours of leisure, and there came a time when my heart longed for the dear old stories of Japan, and I wrote to my mother asking her to send me some books from home. Among others, she selected a popular classic called Hakenden, which I especially loved. It is the longest novel ever written in the Japanese language, and our copy, Japanese bound and elaborately illustrated, consisted of 180 volumes. With great effort, Mother succeeded in obtaining a foreign-bound copy in 2 thick volumes. I welcomed these books with joy and was amazed when one of the teachers, seeing them in my bookcase, took them away, saying that they were not proper books for me to read. Oh no, that's so sad. That's the saddest thing I've ever read. I was gonna make a joke about this being the longest book ever read, saying something like, "This is why shonen anime are so long today." But now I just feel sad that the teacher took her books away from her that she waited so long to get. To me, Hakenden, with its wonderful symbolism, was one of the most inspiring books I had ever read. It was written by the 18th century by Bakin, our great philosopher-novelist, and so musical is the literature and so lofty the ideals that frequently it has been compared by Japanese of learning to Milton's Paradise Lost and the Divine Comedy of Dante. The author was a strong believer in the unusual theory of spiritual transmigration, and his story is based on that belief. The tale is of the daimyo Satomi, who, with his almost starving retainers, was holding his castle against a besieging army. Knowing that the strength of the enemy lay alone in their able general, he desperately offered everything he possessed, even to his precious daughter, to anyone brave enough to destroy his enemy. Satomi's faithful dog, a handsome wolfhound named Yatsubusa, bounded away, and the next morning appeared before his master, carrying by its long hair the head of Satomi's foe. With their leader gone, and the enemy was thrown into confusion, and Satomi's warriors, with a mighty push, put them to flight. Thus was the province restored to peace and prosperity. Then so bitterly did Satomi regret his promise that he was enraged at the very sight of the faithful animal to whom he owed his good fortune. But his beautiful daughter, the Princess Fuse, pitied the wronged animal. "The word of a samurai once uttered cannot be recalled," she said. "It is my duty to uphold the honor of my father's words." So the filial daughter went to Yatsubusa to a mountain cave where she spent her time in praying to the gods that a soul might be given to the brave animal, and with every murmured prayer the noble nature of the dumb Yatsubusa grew nearer to the borderline of human intelligence. One day, there came to the mountain a loyal retainer of Satomi. He saw just within the cave the Princess Fuse sitting before the shrine holding an open book. Before her, like a faithful vassal, Yatsubusa listened with bowed head to the holy reading. Believing he was doing a noble deed, the retainer lifted his gun and fired. The bullet, swift and strong, was guided by fate. It passed directly through the body of Yatsubusa and on, piercing the heart of Princess Fuse. At that instant, the freed spirit of the princess, as 8 shining stars in a floating mist, rose from her body and floated softly through the sky to the 8 corners of the world. Each star was a virtue: loyalty, sincerity, filial piety, friendship, charity, righteousness, courtesy, and wisdom. Fate guided each star to a human home, and in course of time, into each of these homes a son was born. As they blossomed into manhood, fate brought the youths together, and the reunited 8 virtues became heroic vassals, through whom came glory to the name of Satomi. So the spirit of the filial daughter brought honor to her father's name. I could not understand why this miracle story, that's a really funny word for them to make compound, this miracle story, filled with lofty symbolism, could be more objectionable than the many fables and fairy tales of the personified animals that I had read in English literature. But after much pondering, I concluded that thoughts, like the language on one side of the world, are straightforward and literal, and on the other, vague, mystical, and visionary. At the end of my school life, my beloved books were returned to me. I have them now, battered, loose-leafed, and worn, and I still love them. As time passed on, I learned to like almost everything about my school, even many of the things which at first I had found most trying, but there was one thing which from the very first I had enjoyed with my whole heart. The school building was surrounded by large grounds with tall trees. A small lawn near the principal doorway was well cared for, but beyond was an extensive stretch of weedy grass and untrained shrubbery. There were no stone lanterns, no pond with darting goldfish, and no curving bridge. Just big trees with unbound branches, uncut grass, and freedom to grow. At my home there was one part of the garden that was supposed to be wild. The trees were twisted like wind-blown mountain pines, the stepping stones marked as an irregular path across ground covered with pine needles. The fence was of growing cedar peeping between uneven rods of split bamboo, and the gate was of bushwood tied with rough twine. But someone was always busy trimming the pines or cutting the hedge, and every morning Gia wiped off the stepping stones, and after sweeping beneath the pine trees, carefully scattered fresh pine needle gatherings from the forest. There, the wildness was only constant repression, but here at the school, everything was filled with the uplifting freshness of unrestrained freedom. This I enjoyed with a happiness so great that the very fact that such happiness could exist in the human heart was a surprise to me. One section of this wild ground the teachers divided into small gardens, giving one to each of the girls and providing any kind of flower seed we wanted. This was a new delight. I already loved the free growth of the trees and the grass on which I could even walk in my shoes, but this plant what you please garden gave me a wholly new feeling of personal right. I, with no violation of tradition, no stain on my family name, no shock to parent, teacher, or townspeople, no harm to anything in the world, was free to act. So instead of having a low bamboo fence around my garden, as most of the girls had, I went to the kitchen and coaxed the cook to give me some dried branches used for kindling. Then I made a rustic hedge, and in my garden, instead of flowers, I planted potatoes. No one knows the sense of reckless freedom from which this absurd act gave me, nor the consequences to which it led. It had unloosed my soul, and I stood listening while, from a strange tangle of unconventional smiles and informal acts, of outspoken words and unhidden thoughts, of growing trees and untouched grass, the spirit of freedom came knocking at my door. And that is the end of chapter 14, and that is where we're going to stop for tonight. I want to say we're pretty firmly at the center of the book at this point. We're on page 88, and the final page is 200, so yeah, just shy of halfway through. This chapter is going to be the halfway point, I think. I'm pretty excited for next time. I think I'm going to try to keep doing reading every Sunday till we finish this book, at least. I don't have another book picked out for once we finish this one. I actually was planning to read this one since like last year on stream. It's hard to find good public domain books that I think would be interesting to read on stream that aren't like, you know, classics that everybody's read or everybody's already familiar with. I did start Phantom of the Opera before I quit streaming, like a while back. For those of you who don't know, I started streaming 3 years ago, and I've streamed in like small bursts until this past year when I finally started streaming consistently. So I did read like half of Phantom of the Opera last, and I never finished it. So I think it might be nice to actually read the whole thing. So we might consider doing Phantom of the Opera from the beginning over again and finish it next time. But there's been some new public domain books coming out that might be interesting to look at and see what we want to do. But for now, I'm going to leave you guys. I hope you're all nice and tucked in. Thank you for hanging out tonight. Hope you're nice and cozy. And I will see you next time. Schedule will be posted for this upcoming week within the next hour here. If you're in Discord, you can see it there. If you're not in Discord and you want to see it, come join Discord. Links in the about. But have a lovely night. Take care, and I will see you all so soon.